Hi, everyone. My name's Katie Anderson. I am a senior director on our EDF+Business team, and I lead our work with food and agriculture companies on driving sector-wide scaled change on climate action. And what we know is that we've been talking a lot about livestock, we've been talking about methane, we've been talking about the need from a planetary perspective to drive those emissions down. But today in this panel, what I really want to talk about is how do we make that work for businesses and for the companies who have these emissions sitting in their supply chains, and what's working, what the challenges are. And so here at EDF, we have been working with business for many decades, trying to find those pragmatic solutions to drive down emissions. And when it comes to ag methane, we know that investors, consumers, other key stakeholders, even employees, are starting to really raise the profile of climate and also methane specifically. Right now is that methane moment. And so I think it's creating more opportunity for companies to capture value, capture market share, and also reduce risks by engaging on methane right now. And I'm very excited to have the panel speak more about that. So we really, when we're talking to companies, we ask for 4 key things. The first is to set an ambitious methane reduction goal within the broader climate strategy that you have, and report on that annually. The second is to implement. We really need to drive to action immediately. So implement solutions that are available today to reduce methane emissions by partnering with supply chain, partnering with farmers, and finding those creating economic value for farmers. The third is to invest in new innovation. So we know we don't have the whole toolkit we need. And how do we get more tools driving through that? Companies are really good at innovating. So how can we leverage those innovation engines to create more solutions for methane emissions? And then the fourth is to advocate for public policy that's going to support this. So, what are those other incentives? How do we bring in public sector financing with private sector financing to scale? So those are kind of the 4 key tenets that I'm talking about every day with companies. Really excited to have our panel here today. And I think what we'll get into is what's working, building on the great farmer business story that we just heard. How are those also connecting into these bigger food companies and creating value? So with that, I'll turn it over to my panelists to maybe just introduce yourselves to start and say, where you're from and maybe a little bit about why methane matters for your company specifically.
Thank you so much, Katie, and really delighted to be here. I'm Jeanette Coombs-Lanot, and I lead what we call sustainability advocacy at Danone. Danone, for those who don't know it, is over 100 years old. We're a multinational company operating in over 120 markets. We have 3 health-focused categories, which are dairy and plant-based, for leaders in both dairy and plant-based, specialized nutrition, and waters. And we're also, I think, really convinced that sustainability and performance are very much interlinked. So we are the equivalent of a benefit corporation in France and also in the US. And we're also maybe one of the largest multinationals involved in the B Corp movement. Now, to switch specifically to methane, I think obviously as a dairy leader, methane is really material for Danone. It's 1/4 of our total greenhouse gas emissions. So when we look at addressing and trying to reduce in line with 1.5 degrees, methane is absolutely critical. So that's just a little bit, and I guess we'll get into how we're leading on it. But yeah,
That's great.
Very delighted to be here.
Justin?
Good morning, good afternoon. Justin Ransom, Tysons Foods. I lead our climate and nature work at Tyson, and I've been there for about 5 years. A little bit about Tyson. So for those of you who don't know, Tyson originally started as a transportation distribution company for food, and became the world's largest poultry producer. And then about 20 years ago, I got into the beef business whenever they purchased IBP. And so today, Tyson is one of the largest food companies in the world, and where we're bringing meat production to market. in general, so beef, pork, poultry, turkey, all of the above. However, methane, if you think about it in general terms, methane accounts for about 50% of our enterprise emissions. And so certainly that's coming out of the beef business, most of it, a lot of it's coming out of the beef business. And so it's certainly an area where we've focused, especially in the last 2 years. And excited to talk with you about today, kind of what our journey has been, all the way back to farms of origin, which traditionally that's not how our business worked, right? It was really, we work with our immediate suppliers, but we kind of changed that model and looking to grow it over time as we're working to raise the world's expectations about how much good food can do.
Thank you both so much. So, we know that these supply chains are incredibly complex. We had one great farmer story. We're going to have more. I guess I'm interested in how you all think about engaging with your supply chains when you're thinking about driving climate smart agriculture forward with both dairy and beef producers specifically. If you could give a couple of examples of that, kind of how this gets delivered on the ground.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So we have, for our fresh milk, we do direct sourcing, and we work directly with over 50,000 farms, and this is across the world. So when we talk about how we work on the agricultural transition and climate smart, I think that actually in 2017, we really decided to focus in on regenerative agriculture. And at the time, people are still wondering what that means, but I think we have a pretty clear vision of what it is. And at the time, to drive that, we actually worked with several external stakeholders to develop a specific scorecard for farmers and a lot of technical resources. And then through other coalitions, we also developed specific resources around methane reduction. So when it comes to engaging supply chain, the first thing that we really had to focus on is just developing the technical expertise and formalizing it in resources for farmers. And then it's been through a lot of projects on the ground. We have dozens of projects on dairy farms, and those are in Mexico. We have with us Jaula Esusi, who's leading our work in Africa, in North America, in Europe. And so these are a lot of on-farm projects. And to some extent, it's been a bit of test and learn about how you implement these kinds of changes and how you go further. I think we've seen concrete results. If I take the example, we have a project in Mexico with 500 smallholder farmers, and that project has had some really good outcomes. We've seen GHG emissions decrease 13% in 2 years, and we've also seen that for every dollar invested, it produces $34 in incremental income for the farmers. So we're seeing a lot of good results, and we're also seeing to some extent, challenges in terms of accelerating and scaling, and that's what we're really trying to crack now.
That's great. And I think what you're pointing to, too, I really loved. And Chris, you said there's no one-size-fits-all approach. And I think that's so critical to remember when you're working in an agricultural supply chain, because you're talking about farmer in Mexico, that's going to be very different than a farmer in the EU or in the US or Morocco where you're sourcing. And so creating those, kind of flexible approaches that also layer into a global company, that's a complicated thing to manage.
It's definitely a journey.
Yes. So Justin, what's your journey been looking like in this space? How do you work with farmers?
Well, it's varied. As the structure of the beef industry is totally different than the dairy industry. We heard a farm in Western New York that was 1,900 cow dairy, and it sounds like a lot, but there's really large dairies also. And in the beef sector, they're spread all over the country. They're not necessarily consolidated in specific geographies. The sizes of the operations, to have a 1,900 head beef operation that's a really large beef operation, where the average herd size is about 35 head. So it's a totally different industry dynamic. But I think nonetheless, it's important that we start somewhere. And so as we think about where we started, a couple of years ago, we worked with some scientists to help us model what's a pathway to a net neutral cow? Is it even possible? And what are all the variables that would have to go into understanding how do we decarbonize our beef value chain? And so through that work, we ultimately recognize that it's really the production practices on the farm of origin that drive the most impact. That's where about 70+% of the emissions are. The challenge is that's 4 or 5 people, businesses removed from us. And so going and finding these farmers has been a first big step, right? And so we worked with others in taking a standard that existed called Beef Care. And ultimately, we added an environmental component that allowed us to really challenge producers to begin deploying practices that would have an impact on the sustainability of the animals they were producing. And ultimately, that's kind of where our journey started. And so our goal was 5 million acres of impacted in terms of improved pasture management. And so that's the first start in the journey. But there's a lot to do as we go. And the exciting part is we're seeing positive results. We've enrolled some of the most progressive producers in the industry in this program. And so we're now asking those producers, hey, bring along your neighbors. And it's kind of a journey that if Tyson is up there saying you should do X, Y, and Z, they're never going to listen. But they certainly are interested in hearing from their peers and cohorts that are leading in this conversation. And so working with them has been critically important.
That's great. And I think gives a sense of some of the challenges in this that we need to continue to work to overcome, and also where the starting places are and how you move along that journey with your producers, with your suppliers, with your supply chain. So thanks for sharing those. I guess, maybe what I'm also really interested in is kind of this theme of the business case. How do we build the business case for this internally? We know that you all are sustainability professionals. You really want to see this happen, but you also have to move an internal business. And so, would love to hear a little bit about how you make the business case for methane action specifically. I know Danone stepped forward with a methane-specific goal earlier this year. Would love to hear a little bit about the journey of how you brought the business along in that discussion.
Yeah, actually, I've been thinking about that because it was a year ago. We really worked a lot with EDF to be able to make this jump and take the step. And so a year ago, we were discussing the fact that we were trying to make the case and we were considering doing this. So how to make the business case? I think one of the key success factors for us is that we created a cross-functional task force where we had Gouda, who's here. We had agricultural and experts. We had procurement. We had public affairs and people who are more working with the external stakeholders. And very critically, we had people from our dairy business. And we started this task force really because we saw a couple of years ago, the discussion on methane, it started to change. And we saw the landscape starting to change, and we started to get more and more questions from journalists, from investors, from NGOs about what we were doing, what was our strategy. And in fact, we had been working on it, but the way we had been working on it was kind of wrapped up in our general carbon reduction journey. So we hadn't really been focusing on it so specifically. So we formed this cross-functional task force, and we built what we believe was a pretty good business case, and it was really around understanding the risk of inaction. So we saw the risk if we didn't act, that maybe consumers would start to associate more and more animal protein, and including dairy, with climate change. And the other area of risk was really around policy, because we saw more and more governments looking specifically at how to slash emissions linked to agriculture. So we saw this risk rising. We also saw opportunity. We saw an opportunity in kind of accelerating on the topic, in reducing our emissions faster, in creating maybe in the future a consumer-facing activation for our dairy business. So it was both about mitigating risk and also looking and leaning into the opportunities. And I think the other success factor was really working with external stakeholders. And EDF was absolutely critical in that. And I think the game changer, we brought a member of our executive committee who was looking at this. We brought him to the COP27 last year. He met with Fred from EDF. He met with a global methane hub. And I really think at that moment, he really understood what an opportunity it was to take the plunge, to take risk. I mean, because it is opening us up to greater scrutiny, but also to lead. So in the end, it was about getting the business case through a cross-functional approach and getting the right stakeholders to help us understand the opportunity and also understand how to do it in a credible way. And so based on all this, we earlier this year, we made a public commitment to reduce methane emissions 30% for our fresh milk between 2020 and 2030. Fresh milk is roughly 70% of our methane emissions. And for the other part, because this is all, as you say, it's more complicated, that's in some ways a little bit it's more straightforward because we're working directly with farms. For the other part of our dairy, it's more dairy ingredients, is part of our commitment. We said we would engage our suppliers to also accelerate on methane reduction.
Yes, well, thank you. That was really a first of its kind commitment. We're super excited about it, and also kind of continuing to work with you and also with others in the dairy space to think about how we bring that across the rest of the sector too. So Justin, I'd love to turn to you. How do you all think about the business case for this? How do you, within a big protein company, work on a lot of different issues? How do you think about that?
Right. First, I think one of the biggest challenges is there's no solve today.
Yeah.
No solve today.
For beef. Yeah.
For beef. And the reality is, so we started working 2 years ago and trying to find solves that we could develop technology or look at existing technologies. And so we've been involved in research to understand the potential of solutions that are out there. And so I think that is a critical enabler. And so investing in R&D, investing in innovation, being able to connect the dots with the value chain, the end of life of these animals in the feedlot situations is a much easier place to impact, right? Because they're on a regimented diet, very consistent day in and day out. But when a cow is out roaming a 10,000 acre pasture, it's difficult to administer anything to mitigate methane. But there's been so much advancements in research in the last couple of years. Just the last 2 years alone, the advancements in research, some of the work coming out of Europe relative to, there's genomic indicators of there's some potential for some breeds or some cohorts within breeds that are releasing less methane than others. And so just understanding the genomics, the microbiome within the animal, understanding the mechanisms of how do we do this and still have a positive health outcome for the animal. There's so many unknowns, but basically first and foremost is starting to invest in research and really understand how do we make good decisions relative to the business case. I mean, that's something that obviously we're constantly working on. In a real environment, we have to find win-wins. We have to bring business solutions to bear that are good for the business, that are good for customers, that are good for farmers, that are good for animals, because to have losers in the conversation, it makes it difficult for any kind of meaningful transition. And so our approach really is, as we look at what we're doing relative to climate smart beef, it's really about how do we start where we know the opportunities are? How do we collect data? How do we incent farmers to change practices, because nothing is free? And then how do we ultimately pull the value through the value chain to be able to bring to market a lower carbon protein? So it's really about adding up the dots throughout the entire value chain to get to a solution that everybody wants to partake in.
Yeah. Those are very rich. We could go a lot of places with that, but I think maybe the first place I'd love to go is that innovation angle. So, Justin, you're so right that we can't deploy tools we don't have. So I guess I'm interested as you all think about innovation, the need for more solutions. We know that here in the US, we did a study of public investment in innovation and found that only 2% of agricultural investment in R&D goes to enteric methane, even though it's 28% of all agricultural emissions. And so there's a big opportunity on the public policy side to try to continue to drive forward innovation. But what do you all see as kind of the corporate role in thinking about innovation? And kind of pushing for more solution sets?
I think one of the things that we've started and not started, but are working on together is how do we make sure that there is a pathway for approval of products once they become available, right? And, working with our government relations teams to have the right meaningful conversations that allows a pathway that once proven to be beneficial to the animals, beneficial to the environment, that we can find a pathway forward from a regulatory perspective. So I think that's paramount. Yes. And I know that we're on the right track there. Thank you for your leadership in that space. That's
not me. That is others at EDF, but yes, definitely.
But I think that's first and foremost. And then relative to innovation, it's I think there were a lot of different universities and researchers kind of working on so many different things in this space. And now so much research effort is starting to focus on methane. And I think we're going to find solves, right? It makes people nervous for us to come out and make a commitment in methane when there's no clear answer, because what if an answer doesn't show up? And so that's the hesitancy that transparently we've had, because there isn't a solution yet for the beef sector. However, we've invested in research. We'll continue to do so to try to find those solutions. We're working obviously on the I wouldn't call it fast track approval, but a process that's manageable to get ingredients approved for use. And I think those two dual streams really kind of gives a pathway to be able to do something meaningful in the space.
How do you think about that?
Yeah, that really, really resonates. I think for us, I mean, obviously we have a key role to play in investing in and piloting some of these new solutions. And so Danone has piloted Bovaer feed additive, and we ran the longest commercial pilot, and we saw really promising results. And we've also invested in some startups. But to your point, I think what we see is that the landscape is there's a huge opportunity, let's say, to accelerate. And it's also fragmented in terms of its approach to ensuring environmental outcomes, human safety, and also animal welfare. So there's maybe huge opportunity that we have in working more collectively, and that's where we're very happy to be working with you to drive a harmonized approach and to look at how we can accelerate both the type of solutions and also the path to approval and scale.
Yes. Yeah. So we know, what you all are getting at is this is incredibly complex. We need to reduce methane emissions. We can't have human health, animal health, or other environmental challenges. And we need a regulatory approval process in all of these different geographies that's going to bring those to market as quickly as possible, without harm, creating any externalities. And so I think here in the US, we've been focused a lot on how do we streamline that regulatory approval process in a way that's going to deliver those outcomes to the ground. And that's what Justin has been alluding to. We're happy to discuss that with anyone. So, in a sidebar at lunch, if you all are interested. I know the EU regulatory process is completely different. different in every geography. And so I think that's another challenge again, as a global company looking for global impacts, how do you engage in each of these different regulatory spaces? And how do you use that for opportunity, right? So Danone, you've been testing Bovaer in the EU. It's not available yet in the US, but you can start to get some learnings in other places. And I think that's a really interesting thing to continue, finding those inroads as we're waiting in certain other places.
And just to tag on to that, it's also important, and I don't know that it needs to be said, but make sure we don't create technical barriers to trade relative to these ingredients, because that's something that we don't want. We're trying to solve a problem, and so we obviously want to be able to work across borders to be able to do that. Yeah,
super. Okay, I want to be thoughtful about time and give some space for questions. So start to think about questions, but I have two more actually. So I think first, I'm interested, we talk a lot about financial enablers. EDF is an economic driven organization. How do we actually get these practices deployed on the ground? How do we incent farmers to change? How do we support them in that transition? And so I'm interested in both kind of how you all think about your role in that as a large global company. What are the financial incentives that you've seen to work in your projects? But then also, what are the public policy supports that can be, combined in and supported as enablers of that work?
No, it's a great question, and I think there are kind of two challenges, or I guess there are opportunities as well, that I think we need to look at when we're thinking about how to really accelerate and reach scale. The first is the innovation piece that we discussed, and the other is this financing piece. Because what we see, and I was kind of mentioning it before, is that companies, not just Danone, but and Tyson, but many companies are investing in helping farmers transition and providing technical support. In Morocco, we're helping with the milk collection centers. I mean, it's also a question of infrastructure, but the kind of wall we're hitting is just the amount of financing that's needed. And so more and more, I think we're realizing that we really need to drive these public-private approaches. And in the US, actually, we were able to take advantage of the Climate Smart Commodities Program to get grant money, and this was in partnership with lots of different value chain pieces of our value chain, including farmers. We were able to get $70 million total, and a big chunk of that is towards accelerating methane solutions on farm. So that is absolutely a game changer for us. And so there's no other country to date where we're seeing the acceleration that we are in the US, and it's really thanks to this kind of public-private potential, because not only does it bring public resources, but I think it helps to mobilize an entire value chain. So that's game changing. And what we're doing is looking at how we can foster more of those approaches in other geographies. And I think the other piece of it is really getting governments. I know that the EU, for example, has methane targets, but agriculture is not necessarily part of that, or it's not part of that. So both looking at how we can accelerate finance, and also how we can get governments to look at this and focus on it in a way that maybe they haven't yet to date in terms of their climate approaches, and also their methane specific strategies.
Absolutely. And I think companies, there can become this virtuous cycle, right? If companies step forward with methane action and talking about it in that way, then policymakers can join in that. And if policymakers step forward, more companies step forward. And then we create a virtuous cycle of ambition and action that can also help drive innovation. So, Justin, I don't know how you would answer that question about financial enablers.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things in a perfect world, we're going to improve performance. Yeah. And producers are going to want to use these. In a perfect world, we're going to make animals more efficient, convert energy better. So I'm hoping for the perfect world. And we've seen that, right? Yeah. In some cases. Yeah. I don't know if we've seen it on the dairy side, but certainly on the beef side. Yeah. Absolutely. So that's, in my mind, a perfect world. In a not so perfect world, I think one of the critical enablers, and I think the Climate Smart Commodities grants, are the first step in the right direction in creating markets. right? And so that in the reality, in the big game of how do we do this at a macro food level, we have to be thinking about how companies, whether our customers, whether retailers, whoever they might be, how do they participate in setting emissions? And so how do we co-invest together in the value chain to create the transition that has a lasting generational impact versus a 5-year flash in the pan, because no one wants that, right? Yep. We want some space to innovate in timing, but we want a long-term transition. And so I think creating markets that facilitate that allow us to do it on a long-term basis, I think is going to be critically important for long-term success.
That's really great. And I think it's something that we're starting to see percolate more in the space, is how do we work across the supply chain to co-invest alongside farmers? And then also, how do we create that value then back through the chain so that everybody gets to tell that climate story, everybody gets to talk about the win? How do we create that business case at each node? I think we're going to be learning a lot about that in the agricultural space for the next couple of years. And hopefully people talk about what's working and what's not, so we can keep iterating on it and improving those models.
One thing to point to also is I've mentioned a lot about larger farmers, but we really need to make sure that we keep underserved farmers as a critical part of this conversation. Yes. And so that farmers of all sizes, all cultures, how do we give them the same opportunities that we're giving the big farmers, right, for them to participate? And I think as you think about your comments relative to other parts of the world, you see a lot more of that, right? Whereas we might have more consolidation in the U.S. Relative to farm size. And so it's important that we keep our underserved farmers front of mind as we have this conversation, and make sure that they're part of the story too.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that there are also different approaches that are going to be that we need to put in place according to the geography. So in the U.S. and Europe, it's really about looking at how to accelerate enteric, including through some of these innovations, and also investing in the kind of larger scale manure solutions that were being discussed. And in other parts with smallholders, it's really about productivity and maximizing the welfare and the health of the cow, and also just getting the GHG intensity down. So the solutions do look very different, and I think it's really important to be at tailoring and to be keeping those farmers as smallholders in mind as well.
That's right. And geography matters too, right? So in some places it might be about genetics and managing herd genetics or sex semen or these other opportunities. In some places it's about feed management or health. So each farm is different. Each farmer is different, and thinking about ways when you can increase productivity, you're also improving livelihoods alongside. And so I think that can be another opportunity for win-win solutions.
But maybe just one more comment. I couldn't agree more on the market, on the kind of market. We need the market mechanisms and solutions. And I think that the opportunity that we have is really to bring together the value chain partners and really the sector more broadly to accelerate and to put some of those in place, because the really tricky part, again, is just the transition.
That's right.
So how do you get the resources that you need to put the transition into place and get it going, and then the value can be shared?
Yeah. Okay. Well, my last question is the magic wand question. So if you had a magic wand and you could kind of create one enabler for your work on agricultural methane emissions as a company, what would you do? Maybe just a few sentences.
Gosh, I made you start every time. The magic enabler. The magic enabler.
That's right.
Gosh, for methane or the whole sustainable food system.
Let's do methane, because that's too big of a wand otherwise.
Yeah. Everybody would be trying to steal my wand.
Yeah.
I think just in general, I think we have to put business in the center of this, right? We have to find business solutions that can scale. And I think if I had my magic wand, it would be getting quick alignment on the data needed to be able to quantify impact being measured and being able to translate that data up and down the value chain. So it's not just giving data to our customers, but also giving data to farmers so they understand how their animals are performing, the impact of their animals on the environment. And so I would say bringing a business solution to bear that allows the facilitation of a market that can really support the transition.
Mm-hmm. That is a really good one. I really like that one, and I really second that. And the other maybe wand that I would use is really just the aligned financing. Yeah. That's where I feel that we're losing so much momentum because we have these efforts, but they're quite fragmented. How do you align the financing to accelerate and to drive the impact?
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I think we're going to be moving into questions. So open it up to folks. I don't know if there's some roving mic, but yeah, please ask away.
Thank you, and thanks, panelists. I want to ask both of you more about Justin's magic spell you talked about data and measurement. Enteric methane is really challenging to measure, but as you guys make progress and go forward, you're going to have claims that you're going to need to measure and verify. But at the same time, there's a lot of activists out there who bring a lot of scrutiny. A lot of those same activists have a lot of issue with animal agriculture, regardless of the climate size. So I want to dig in a little bit deeper into the magic spell. What are you thinking about when you think about measurement? How important it is to you? Where do you see things right now? Where do you think it needs to go so that you have the data and have the measurement that you are alluding to?
That's a great question. And, we're on a journey relative to data. And we know, everything is based off of models, but we also need a robust MMRV program that verifies, that supports the models and constantly making these models better. There's no two farms that are exactly alike. There's no two cows that are exactly alike. And so we have to trust in the best that we have today, which is models. But the reality is, as we see data all over our lives, and with more data, the models are going to get more powerful and more precise. And so I think, just being transparent with where we're at today, but also accepting that MMRV programs are going to get better. But we have to be moving in the right direction. And I think people have to accept that we are doing something, we are creating transition. It's not perfect, but it's getting better.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, that's an area too where we're going to, I hope, see this kind of leap forward. There's a lot changing, a lot is improving even over a couple of years. And I think, we have to lean into that and know that maybe we don't have the perfect model and the perfect data today, and that's okay. And I think in terms of, I talk a lot to activists, and I think it's really important also to keep talking to them to build the trust, because they're always going to be, wary of some of these, and they have been wary of Danone's commitment, and we've engaged them a lot and brought them along and been transparent about, the challenges we have, including around data and measurement. And I think that, that approach of looking how to improve it, but also just talking to people and building the trust is really, really important.
Yeah, I say all the time, progress over perfection. We need impact now. If we wait for perfect MMRV, perfect models that we can feel are really confident up to the 98th, confidence interval, we will waste the critical decade that we have to act right now. So I think everybody, including activists, right? And EDF lives in the more advocacy or space. We all need to get more comfortable with the fact that there is going to be some ambiguity in the modeling, ambiguity in the numbers, but we need to directionally move toward better data, improved modeling over time, improved measurement over time where it makes sense. And that's going to get us impact now instead of impact in 2030 when it's too late. So I think we all just need to get a little more comfortable with some of that ambiguity as and know that it's going to improve. Next question. Yeah.
There's a few online questions, so maybe let's alternate online and live audience. So there's an anonymous question here on the productivity topic. It says, I totally agree that this is really important in developing countries. However, there is the risk for the, quote, Jevons effect, where more productivity associated with is associated with greater forecasted demand and then greater emissions. So this person would love to hear from the panel how you are thinking about this, because it's kind of a conundrum.
That's a great question, and a bigger question, I think, than what we were covering. I think when we, as John mentioned earlier, what we think about at EDF is improving productivity can reduce methane emissions per unit, and that across the landscape reduces emissions compared to business as usual. And I think that framing is important, because it might mean that a single farmer, is incentivized to increase a cow, but maybe another space, we don't need that milk produced over there. And so I think that is you really have to take that global lens, is how I would answer that question. But I don't know if you all hit up against that same challenge.
I may have misunderstood the question, but in my mind, I was thinking it would drive efficiencies, and theoretically, you might need fewer animals. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think that's also how we think about that question. And I think, it is a global, I understand that the FAO is working on a 1.5 pathway for food and agriculture. It's really a global systems question. But I think generally speaking, if you are increasing productivity, you're reducing the number of cows that you need to produce the same amount of protein.
Yeah, and we also have to think about this in terms of a just transition, right? We need to allow the economies of developing countries to grow, and often agriculture is a way to do that. So how do we think about methane emission reduction and climate impacts as we think about a just transition in these places? I think it's a pretty meaty question. Maybe another one in the room.
Unintended.
Yeah.
I make a lot of meat puns. Yes, I do.
Thanks. This is just a quick question for Justin, who, when you talked about the difficulty of deploying feed additives in pasture-based systems, are you thinking at all about how you use landscape sequestration to offset the emissions on the pasture-based cattle?
100%, and that's where we're starting. And so as we look at the climate smart beef model that we've brought to market, the biggest impact initially is going to be improved pasture management that results in improved carbon sequestration. So that's the first thing that we can do. However, there's other add-ons to it, but that's the first and single biggest thing we can do today without technology.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to this, I didn't mention this before, but when we think about methane reduction, we really think of it as part of this holistic approach that includes carbon sequestration and strengthening biodiversity and improving water use and animal welfare. And I think that's really important to us to maintain this holistic approach, really maximizing the co-benefits of methane reduction.
I think that's a really important point. And when we do our advocacy, we are trying to spotlight methane, but that's not because we don't care about the whole suite. And so you need to be thinking about a holistic climate and sustainability strategy that integrates all of the environmental and social impacts. But we need to make sure that methane doesn't get lost in that fog, which sometimes has happened as in how we communicate about it. So it's a kind of this push-pull in EDF's advocacy and how we're just to, kind of put a finer point on that.
And maybe just to say one more thing about that. We actually think about it in terms of a hierarchy of solutions. So we would want to avoid a scenario where if a farm didn't look at how to, the overall farm management and how to improve manure management and how to, optimize feed efficiency and we're just using some of those breakthrough solutions. We almost think about it as a hierarchy where those are really for the last mile.
That's right. Yeah, great.
Go back on.
online?
We do have an online question. It's from Partha Ray. Some of the challenges and solutions associated with reducing ag methane often overlap with other environmental issues. So one intervention can tackle both climate and other environmental issues, but sometimes one intervention can reduce methane, but create or aggravate other issues, for example, water issues. So as you're in this space, how do you leverage this and convert it into an opportunity?
I think we were just talking about that point. So ironically, we're answering that in advance. But, really land, air, water, biodiversity are all interconnected. And today's conversation is focused on methane, but they're so interconnected. And it's become even more evident in some of the work we're doing on these farms. Because if we can see, ranches, farms becoming more drought resistant. Through carbon sequestration, the roots are growing deeper. They're taking the water table down. However, the plant is still surviving, so we're having to find the farmers are having to find alternative ways to water the livestock. However, they have more grass than their neighbors have that have been doing things the way they've been doing it for 100 years. Right? But the neighbor has surface water. So it's really interesting to watch how the ecosystem works and evolves as practices change. And in so many ways, we're talking about doing things pre-settlers, right? We're talking about changing practices that go back to what grazing was like before fences in some regards. But how do we do it? We have electronic collars or electronic ear tags that people are using. There's pasture management systems that require fencing, but there's a lot of ways to get to what the new normal looks like. And in some cases, farmers may have been doing this, right, and weren't getting credit for it. And I think those that go into that regenerative mindset are kind of ahead of the curve. And they're thinking through it more holistically than probably what my family was doing. But we can all learn. And so there's huge opportunities to make sure that we're taking in land, air, and water all together as we work on this in biodiversity.
Back here?
Yep, okay.
I have a follow-up for the last. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Now moved on. Pete, did you want
just actually a quick point because firstly, because I have a question for you, but maybe this kind of makes it somewhat relevant as well. Unbeknownst to EDF, Jeanette, I supply milk to one of your biggest baby formula plant, a state-of-the-art plant, which is phenomenally sustainable. But maybe we need to be communicating more as I guess corporate back to dairy farm level. But I've heard a lot of talk today about how do we get farmer buy-in. And this is a question to both of you. How important is it, and this is for companies looking on, that big corporate entities and ultimately people that I and we as farmers supply go to policymakers and sit down and drive home? Policy is not that you guys in government around the world are implementing, is not incentivizing farmers to reduce emissions, and farmers are being painted as the bad guys in town.
Yes.
But we as farmers cannot stand on our own 2 feet. We need the powerhouses that are we are supplying and that represent us as a direct supplier to the consumer to be at the forefront of changing policies. How important do you rate it for corporates to influence policy to go in the right direction? I have one other part of that question that I've slightly forgot, but actually, the last part of that is, in sustainability, is it key to link up with marketing and look at regardless of how we can save the world, unless we can get the consumer to buy into it in the supermarket and the grocery store. So is that key, a key decision in sustainability that marketing says, yeah, we can really, really sell this concept?
Yeah, I love these questions. So we should definitely take it offline about the policy and the marketing. On the policy front, absolutely. I think we have a critical responsibility, and we're really trying to, I think, elevate our voice more and more, and work together with others in the sector to go to policymakers and to say this is critically important. We need to address it, and we need to address it in a way that works for the farmers and in a way where they're going to feel really supported, because it is hard, and you're doing the work on the ground in the end. So I think we are trying to step that up and accelerate that, and I think we have a huge opportunity if we work more together. Because often the way this advocacy goes is that it's kind of the corporates have their own route and then the farmers have their own route, and probably we need to think about how we team up more and more. And what we absolutely want to avoid is any scenario where the farmers feel that they're being painted as the bad guys, because it's quite the opposite. So we're really wary of that. And we'd be happy to think with you and with others about how to do it and how to be successful at it. And the other piece on the marketing, yes, but I think if I take the methane example, it was really important that the category was on board, but they didn't see immediately the opportunity to go and make a claim. I think they were thinking more long term, and we did this for a lot of reasons, including business continuity and license to operate reasons. But I think the way we think about it is it's really important to bring them along on the journey so that they can start to understand how to engage the consumer at the end. And we know that consumers, these are really complicated topics. We know consumers care a lot about climate, but they don't necessarily feel equipped or empowered or know how to make decisions, at the supermarket in line with that. So I think it's a journey where we're all learning how to do it, and we need to bring marketing along with us. But it's not something that we see, if marketing had said, oh, we don't see how to value that at the consumer level immediately, I think we still would have gone with it and gone ahead and done it, because we saw a lot of other reasons in the business case for doing it.
Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
I'll answer those in reverse order. Start with the marketing. I would prefer that we don't market it. I would prefer that we get good at communicating, and then maybe marketing can happen in time. I think the challenge is you have marketers that are excited about something different, and then they go sell it, and then nobody trusts it. I think what we need to focus on is how do we communicate a really complex topic really well that people can understand, so that we have informed consumers that can make good decisions. So, love marketing people, but I married one. But yeah, we got to focus on communications. The second thing is farmers are the solution. Agriculture is the climate solution in my mind. I grew up a farmer. I'm still a farmer. The challenge is you ask a farmer and they're like, we're sustainable. We've been sustainable for 200 years. Okay. But they have an opportunity to become more sustainable. And it's really about getting farmers on board and understanding that what they've been doing since their grandfather or great-grandfather may not have been the right thing, right? Maybe we should have done something different. And so I think bringing farmers along in the conversation of how do we do this different? How do we do this more sustainably? And having them part of the conversation is critically important. We don't want to force anything on them, but what we're doing is taking these progressive farmers and ranchers and asking them to help tell the story, right? Because nobody's going to listen to us. And so I'm a huge advocate for farmers, and I don't always self-proclaim to be a farmer, but the reality is I'm proud of my heritage, and I'm proud for what farmers have done. And we need to help make sure that we're partners with them as we transition to a more sustainable food system.
I love that. We need to communicate, we don't yet need to market. I think that's a really wise and well summed up statement. Okay, I think we have maybe time for one more question.
Yeah, going back to the subject of, I guess, like business cases and adoption, wanted to get your thoughts on, the viability of the inset market as one way to incentivize farmers to adopt some of these technologies.
I think it's a pathway. I mean, I think our inset market has to be as robust as what the offset market was in terms of criteria and standards. And I mean, I think the best I can tell currently, and what I'm telling our business is that's the way that we achieve all this, is if we can share across the entire value chain. So we have to incent all the way back to the beginning and all the stakeholders in between, and we all have to participate in a transition together. But if there's other ways to do it, I'm all ears.
Yeah, and I think the way we think about it is what is really critical is this value chain action and sharing and incense, not necessarily the markets, but how do we drive solutions where we're going to have a clear co-investment and shared action across the value chain, and how are we going to share credit for it and all get credit for it? Mm-hmm. And that is an area, and my colleague Hauda is here, and she's leading this work, but where we see some progress, but still a lot of challenges and barriers linked to the accounting standards, linked to all sorts of other things. So I think it's an absolute, can either be a barrier to action or an accelerant. And we need to, I think together about how collectively we make it an accelerant.
Yeah, I think we need a financial toolbox, just like we need a technical toolbox. And I think insetting is one piece of the financial toolbox that could be really a game changer, but also there's others that we can slot in. So in different settings, different financial tools are going to be more relevant. That would be how I would answer that.
Just one more thing to add relative to this. What I like about it the most, the insetting scenario, is you have to work for a net zero ambition. You have to work within your value chain. Mm-hmm. Because 18 months ago, I was competing with oil and gas who was trying to buy carbon credits off of ranches, right? Food sector cannot compete with that. And so forcing sectors to work within their own sectors to reduce emissions is critically important for transition. And so I'm personally excited about the potential for insets. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I think that's the end, but I do just want to thank our panel so much for coming. We were able to talk about the business case, what are the delivery drivers, and then also what are those key enablers that can help us scale these across all of the food and agriculture sector, which we know is absolutely critical for a 2030 future. So thank you all so much for coming. I think now we're going to lunch. John Tousell can bring us there.